Hello, good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you are on the planet. Welcome to Sustainability in Your Ear, the podcast conversation about accelerating the transition to a sustainable carbon neutral society. I'm your host, Mitch Ratcliffe. Thanks for joining in today, and happy Earth Day. Because it's the one day of the year dedicated to thinking about preserving and restoring the planet's ecosystem to its full biodiversity and beauty, we're going to take a slightly different approach to the show today. I want to share what I learned at the Ellen MacArthur Foundation's Circular Economy-focused REMADE conference, as well as explain some of the thoughts about the path to building the circular economy that I developed as I listened to the scientists at the event. REMADE was convened at the National Academy of Sciences, Engineering, and Medicine in Washington, D.C. earlier this month. It gathered scientists and business leaders to discuss and share research about how to enable a circular economy. The Ellen MacArthur Foundation partners with the REMADE Institute to create the conference. The REMADE Institute is a public-private partnership established by the U.S. Department of Energy to lower the carbon footprint of industry in the United States. REMADE focuses on reducing waste and creating circular systems in industry, which accounts for 30.2% of annual human CO2 emissions. And the conference has a decided tilt toward recycling. That is, industrializing recycling at a massive scale so that consumers no longer need to learn materials and sort them at home for better recycling. And as we'll hear later, that requires a massive investment, and it's a form of technological utopianism, promising solutions so simple people don't have to think about it. I'm a little skeptical of that, as you'll hear. Many of the scientific presentations at the event explored advanced recycling technologies for plastics, textiles, and metals, including e-waste, as well as industrial decarbonization techniques and how to design products for easier recyclability. These are all important and compelling initiatives that will move us toward a make, recapture, remake approach to the products that humans rely on daily. However, we are far from that reality. And in the meantime, society as a whole needs to shift its thinking from today's take, make, waste economy to one that requires fewer raw materials from nature up front, that recaptures and shares usable products instead of trashing them, and ultimately keeps materials in circulation for many generations of products. That's a task that each of us contributes to when we decide to buy fewer single-use packaged products, for instance, or when we donate clothing instead of sending it to a landfill after wearing it only a few times. Or, as the ethologist and environmental campaigner Jane Goodall told me in a conversation a few weeks ago, this can happen when each of us becomes fully tuned into where the products we use are made, how they are made and by whom, and where the products go after we dispose of them. Knowing these things helps us think about how to participate in a lower impact economy. In other words, the circular economy starts in our imaginations and is brought to life through our informed decision-making. We cannot sit back and wait for others to make circular living easier. The harder first steps that change the demand side of the economic equation and ultimately force companies and governments to deliver what we want, a sustainable, low-carbon economy, those decisions lie with us. So what does the economy look like, the circular economy? As depicted in business presentations, it's a single vast loop of materials moving into products, being used for a short or long useful lifespan, and then recaptured and recycled for reuse. But that reality is far more complex. In fact, it's a nested set of circular economies. Lots of different materials flowing in and out of different products, back and forth, some locally, some globally, some nationally, some continentally. Think about the materials in your jeans. The cotton used to make the denim is grown in warm regions and shipped to mills, sometimes halfway around the world. And then there's the synthetic thread used in the stitching, which is made from oil, and the buttons, which is made from metal, mined in various places. And then, when we recycle these materials, they each have to move into a separate circular system for specialized processing based on what they are made of. Then all that comes back together to make a new pair of jeans or whatever else those materials might be used for. In other words, it's an incredibly complex system that we need to orchestrate. And as Professor Tom Sakau of Linköping University in Sweden explained at the REMADE conference, circular economies are diverse, complicated and influenced by local reality and culture. To achieve that big picture, that is a global circular economy, one big loop, we need to assemble many symphony orchestras and get them playing synchronously in different regions, exchanging raw materials. These things are known as feedstocks to industry. So the stuff that you use to make a product is a feedstock. Then these are matched with finished components, and all of that interacts to support the packaging and delivery of products to people everywhere. Circular economy, not a simple thing to achieve, and we are piecing it together. That was clear from everything that I saw at the REMADE conference. And there's a lot of other innovation going on. Google's Mike Werner, who was on Sustainability in Your Ear a couple of years ago, also debuted at REMADE a new technology for high-speed sorting of materials in recycling facilities. Google's CircularNet uses optical recognition and spectral cameras of all sorts to identify materials down to different types of plastic as it flies by on a sorting conveyor in a MRF, or materials recovery facility. These things are moving at many feet per second, and CircularNet could help recover more materials, but of course it needs to be installed first. And that decision and the money to spend to get that stuff installed depends on local communities making the investment. I came away from REMADE more convinced than ever that we have the technical solutions for the waste crisis. We can turn the waste into useful materials, and we'll be able to do so more effectively every year. The problem is, how do we change all of our thinking so that that becomes a priority rather than just another unattractive political choice for our leadership? But there was something a little jarring about the circular economy discussion at REMADE because it focused primarily on industry. A significant feature of the circular economy largely was undiscussed: the reduce, reuse, and repair movements that can lower our environmental impact as much or more than recycling alone. I think this is due to the industrial focus, of course, because companies still don't want to hear that they may sell less stuff. And to be fair, several companies, including Cisco, the networking equipment maker, emphasized designing products for easier repair during the conference. Nevertheless, rethinking the business of selling, supporting, and ultimately reusing products or the materials they're made of was not of very much interest to the industrial scientists that I heard speak at REMADE. The most exciting presentation at the REMADE conference was by Robert Watson, who's the father of LEED. That's the Green Building Standard. And he's also the catalyst behind the SWEEP Solid Waste Management Standard that Earth911 has joined. Rob is also a principal at Upland Road, which is developing a new strategy for regional circular economies. It transforms municipalities' approach to discarded materials, something that he calls a Sustainable Materials and Advanced Recovery Technology Center. And the acronym for that is SMART. A SMART center combines materials sorting currently performed by municipal recycling programs with refinement and production facilities. It's conceivable that a SMART center could take in discarded paper and produce a cardboard box for local use. But Watson's vision is much larger. He imagines every material, all but about 10% of what we toss out, he said, becoming new feedstock for industrial use. And I think with the advent of 3D printing and miniaturization, both of recycling and production technology, Watson's is a feasible vision. Rob makes the case, which is well-founded, that the United States is severely undercounting its waste, which inflates recycling data, which was last updated by the Environmental Protection Agency in 2017. Rather than recycling around 30% of our waste, we might be recovering only 25 or perhaps less. The recycling system has failed to evolve, and the SMART Center, Watson argues, is the way forward. He described a system that simplified consumers' participation with no more sorting, just offering one bin into which all materials are tossed for curbside pickup. Now, I have a few comments that I want to share based on my years of working with Earth911. First, even if everything can be recycled, the level of contamination when it arrives at a SMART center will determine how much of that material can be actually useful in the next step of production. That requires each of us to continue to take steps at home to ensure that packaging is clean, that food waste is sorted into different containers. And despite Rob's call for one bin, the reality, at least for the next 15 to 20 years, until this kind of facility is widely available, is that we all need to do better when taking the first step in the circular economy. That is, when we put stuff in the bin. Now, that's where we focus our efforts at Earth911, and not to be self-serving. I think having more information about what products and packaging's made of and how to handle that product and packaging at the end of its useful life is needed right now. And we're still only at the beginning of the journey toward a circular economy. Next, there's the cost. Now, Rob told me that a smart center will rely on what we call a waste shed. That is like a watershed, the geography from which materials are collected. A waste shed of about 200 square miles per facility. Now, US cities cover about 3.5 million square miles. So we'll need a lot of smart centers based on the size of the waste shed that Rob described. That would be about 17,000 facilities. But let's assume that they can be organized regionally and made more cost efficient as the systems scale up. So we'll use a very conservative estimate that the US needs at least 500 smart centers. Now, at an average cost of $1 billion, that's a $500 billion investment. But the returns would be huge because the cost of sourcing raw materials from around the world today, which is about $3.5 trillion annually, would be drastically reduced because we'd be shifting from making things with virgin feedstocks to making things with reused materials that are available locally. There's a lot less transportation cost involved. There's a lot less carbon emissions associated with it. And if we've done this correctly, a lot less deforestation and destruction of nature. The system could easily break even within a decade simply by reducing our dependence on virgin raw materials. So, what's the path to a circular economy? I've been thinking about this and talking with experts for most of a decade now. In addition to an evolved recycling system, we need a signaling system embedded in the economy to help identify where materials are at every step in their life cycle so that we can better manage supply and demand. That's the key to unlocking the waste problem entirely. We can do everything much more efficiently. And there are companies working on this. GS1, the company that manages the Universal Product Code barcode, who recently had someone on sustainability in your ear, and Digimarc, a digital watermark labeling company, are working to make products, even individual instances of a product, identifiable. So you'd be able to say this is not just a pair of jeans, but the specific pair of jeans manufactured on a given date, purchased by a given person, and that ultimately would be recorded as recycled on another date. All of these companies are working to make these products identifiable. But how will we track what comes into our homes and leaves again? Do people really want to scan empty Pepsi bottles to find out if, after they put it in the bin, it was actually recycled? Again, the first step in the circular economy starts with the people who, after finishing a product or its packaging, put it in the bin and get it back into circulation. Tracking or a signaling system for materials is one key part of a solution that reduces waste overall and can bring the economy back within planetary boundaries. But we each have to take a step to start to participate in that, to send the signal to the economy overall that we want this kind of accountability. Measuring the materials in circulation within the economy is also critical to business and government's ability to manage the supply chain for consumer products and staples that we all rely on. So the problem is the steps between the solution and today. For most of us, the flows in the economy are largely invisible, but we need to know more about what products are made of, where they were made, the pollution involved in the process, and how they can be reused or recycled to reduce the environmental impact of each of our lives. Now, in 2021, 88% of consumers told Wunderman Thompson that they believe brands and companies should embrace sustainability as a practice. But that will only happen if we take the time to learn and choose the products that represent real progress, not just the greenwashed products that promise to do a good thing, but the ones that actually provide an accountable way for us to tell that we're contributing to the progress towards a sustainable circular economy, or simply playing along with a bad game. It's on all of us, individuals and companies, governments in cities, states, and nations, to collaborate to accelerate progress toward a circular economy. On Earth Day, we pause for a moment and celebrate the planet and its biodiversity, which we all want to protect. Take that same moment daily to learn about the packaging that your food arrived in and decide to choose materials that can be recycled. Ask questions about how far a product traveled to reach you. Was it worth the carbon emissions associated with the long distance shipping? If you don't think so, buy local. But don't just buy local because it's local without checking the producer's practices. There's waste and carbon emissions in everything we use. And if a farmer hasn't been using natural or regenerative agricultural techniques, that local produce may be worse for you than something that was flown from halfway around the world. There's waste and carbon in everything, like I said, and it doesn't make this an intractable problem. The learning that you do today will help make every product, every item of packaging, every ounce of food waste go back into the system. Someday we can get there, but we have to start working together to do it. For now, it's about taking steps toward a goal our grandchildren will realize and from which many future generations will benefit. So, folks, happy Earth Day. Please take a moment and get involved. And as usual, let me just remind you that here's an action you can take today. Spend a moment to share this podcast or any of the more than 460 interviews we produced on sustainability in your ear. Writing a review on your favorite podcast platform will help your neighbors find us. You folks are the amplifiers that can spread more ideas to create less waste. So please tell your friends, family, and coworkers that they can find us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, iHeartRadio, Audible, or any other fine purveyor of podcast goodness that they prefer. Thank you so much for your support. And again, happy Earth Day. I'm Mitch Ratcliffe. This is Sustainability in Your Ear, and we will be back with another innovator interview soon. In the meantime, folks, take care of yourself, take care of one another, and let's all take care of this beautiful planet of ours. Have a green day.